woke up that Saturday morning with the kind of groggy optimism only a weekend can bring. The sun was filtering through the blinds in my bedroom, casting soft stripes across the hardwood floor, and the air carried that crisp, early autumn bite that makes you want to linger under the covers just a little longer. My plan for the day was gloriously simple. Brew a pot of coffee, maybe sit out on the porch with a book, and if I was feeling particularly ambitious, tackle some overdue yard work. It was the kind of morning where you could almost hear the world exhaling, where the neighborhood felt like it was holding its breath in a rare moment of calm. I stretched, yawned, and shuffled to the kitchen in my faded flannel pajama pants, already daydreaming about the first sip of that dark roast. Little did I know, the universe had other plans that involved a full-blown assault on my peace, my property, and my patience. As I stood at the counter, waiting for the coffee maker to gurgle its way to completion, I glanced out the kitchen window. The view was usually nothing special, just my backyard, a modest patch of grass framed by a low wooden fence, with a couple of maple trees that were just starting to turn red. But this morning, something was off. Way off. My eyes locked onto a scene so bizarre it took my brain a solid 10 seconds to process it. There, in the middle of my backyard, was a construction crew. Not just one or two guys with a ladder, but a full-on team of workers, at least 6 of them, hammering and sawing like they were auditioning for a home improvement reality show. They were building something big, a wooden shed, already halfway to completion, its skeleton of 2x4s rising like an uninvited guest. The thing was massive, easily 10 feet wide, and it wasn't just sitting on my land. It was planted a good 6 feet past my property line, as if my fence was nothing more than a suggestion. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and blinked again, half convinced I was still dreaming. Maybe I'd had one too many beers watching the game last night, and this was some kind of hallucination. But the rhythmic thwack of hammers and the sharp whine of a power saw were unmistakable. The smell of fresh-cut lumber wafted through the open window, mixing with the scent of my coffee in a way that felt like a personal insult. My heart started pounding, a slow, heavy thud in my chest, as the reality of what I was seeing sank in. This wasn't a dream. This was a nightmare, complete with a soundtrack of nail guns and the audacity of whoever thought they could just waltz onto my property and start building. I grabbed my mug, barely noticing the coffee sloshing over the rim, and stormed to the back door. My slippers slapped against the floor, and I flung the door open, stepping out into the cool morning air. The scene was even worse up close. The shed's frame was sturdy, professional, like it had been planned for weeks. Piles of lumber and tools were scattered across my grass, and the workers moved with the casual efficiency of people who'd done this 1,000 times. One guy was measuring a board, another was driving nails with a pneumatic gun, and a third was sipping a soda like he was on a lunch break at a perfectly legal job site. I stood there, mouth half open, trying to make sense of the absurdity unfolding in my own backyard. Who the hell authorized this? And why hadn't anyone bothered to, ask me? That's when I saw her. Karen, the queen bee of the HOA, the self-appointed dictator of our little suburban fiefdom. She was standing on the other side of my fence, just beyond the property line, her arms crossed and her lips pursed in that smug, self-satisfied way that made you want to scream. She was wearing a pastel pink t-shirt with live, laugh, love scrawled across it in curly font, her blonde bob perfectly blow-dried despite the early hour. Her hands were on her hips, and she was watching the construction crew like she was overseeing the building of the Taj Mahal. The sight of her sent a jolt of rage through me so intense I nearly chucked my coffee mug across the yard. Karen. Of course it was Karen. Who else would have the gall to pull something like this? I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. My first instinct was to march over there and let her have it, every expletive, every ounce of frustration I'd been bottling up since the day she fined me $50 for leaving my trash cans out an hour past pickup. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the way the workers were just doing their jobs, oblivious to the drama they were caught in. Maybe it was the realization that Karen was probably itching for a fight, ready to twist my words into some HOA violation. Whatever it was, I bit my tongue and decided to take a beat. No sense losing my cool before I even knew what I was dealing with. I needed answers, and I needed them fast. I crossed the yard, my slippers sinking into the dew-soaked grass, and flagged down the closest worker. He was a stocky guy in a neon orange vest and a hard hat, his face weathered from too many days in the sun. He was sipping that soda, a can of Mountain Dew, and he looked at me with the kind of detached patience you'd expect from someone who's answered one too many dumb questions. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Mind telling me why you're building a shed on my property?" He didn't even flinch, just shrugged, like I'd asked him about the weather. "Talk to Mrs. Karen," he said, jerking his thumb toward her. "We just build where we're told." His tone was so matter-of-fact it was almost infuriating. Like this was just another Tuesday for him, putting up sheds on random people's land because some HOA busybody said so. I stared at him, my jaw tightening, waiting for him to elaborate. He didn't. He just took another sip of his soda and went back to measuring a board. I turned my head, locking eyes with Karen across the fence. She was watching me now, her smug little smile widening, like she knew exactly how much this was getting under my skin. That smile was a weapon, sharp and deliberate, designed to make you feel small. I wanted to wipe it off her face, to storm over there and demand answers, but I could already hear her nasally voice in my head, dripping with condescension, telling me to calm down or think of the community. No, I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of seeing me lose it. Not yet. I turned back to the worker, forcing a tight smile. "Thanks for the heads up," I said, my voice clipped. He nodded, clearly relieved I wasn't going to make a scene, and went back to his work. I stood there for a moment, my coffee growing cold in my hand, watching the crew hammer away at what was now officially the ugliest shed I'd ever seen, not because of its design, but because of what it represented. This wasn't just a shed. It was a power grab, a middle finger from Karen to every homeowner who dared to think their property was actually theirs. And it was happening in my backyard. I walked back to the house, my mind racing. The peaceful morning I'd imagined was gone, replaced by a brewing storm that had Karen's name written all over it. I set my mug on the counter, barely noticing the coffee stains spreading across the granite, and started pacing. My first thought was to call a lawyer, maybe the city's zoning office, and shut this down before the shed got any bigger. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that wasn't enough. Karen didn't just need to be stopped. She needed to be outplayed. She thought she could bully me, lie to me, and steal a chunk of my land because she had the HOA rulebook and a superiority complex. She was wrong. I grabbed my phone and started snapping pictures of the construction site. Every angle, every worker, every pile of lumber. I zoomed in on the property markers, those little metal stakes I'd paid a surveyor to install when I bought the house 5 years ago. They were still there, half buried in the grass, clearly showing where my land ended and the so-called community property began. The shed was so far over the line it was practically in my living room. I saved the photos, my hands shaking with a mix of anger and adrenaline, and started mentally cataloging my options. I could tear the shed down myself, but that'd probably land me in hot water with the city. I could file a complaint, but Karen would likely spin it as me being unneighborly. No, whatever I did had to be airtight, legal, and, most importantly, devastating. I poured another cup of coffee, more out of habit than need, and sat at the kitchen table, staring out at the shed. It was ugly, sure, but it was also sturdy, well-built, and, in a twisted way, kind of impressive. Karen hadn't skimped on materials or labor. This wasn't some cheap prefab kit from Home Depot. It was a custom job, probably costing thousands. And that's when the first spark of an idea hit me. This shed wasn't just a problem. It was an opportunity. Karen thought she was building a storage unit for her precious neighborhood equipment. What she didn't realize was that she might have just built me something far more valuable, a way to turn her arrogance against her. I leaned back in my chair, a slow grin spreading across my face. The rage was still there, simmering, but now it was mixed with something else. Inspiration. Karen wanted a war? Fine. But this wasn't going to be the kind of war she was expecting. No shouting matches, no petty HOA fines, no public meltdowns. I was going to fight her with something she'd never see coming: strategy. I didn't know exactly what my next move was yet, but I knew one thing for sure. That shed was mine now, in every way that mattered, and I was going to make Karen regret the day she ever stepped foot on my land. As the morning wore on, the construction crew kept at it, oblivious to the storm brewing just beyond their work zone. I watched them through the window, sipping my coffee, letting my mind churn through possibilities. The shed was already taking shape, its walls going up, its roof starting to form. It was a strange feeling, watching something so invasive become so solid, so permanent. Part of me wanted to run out there and rip it down board by board, but another part, the smarter part, knew that wasn't the play. Karen had made her move, bold and stupid, and now it was my turn. I just needed to figure out how to make it count. I spent the next hour digging through my office, pulling out every document I could find related to my property. The deed, the survey map, the HOA agreement I'd signed when I moved in, all of it. I spread them out on the kitchen table, turning my quiet morning into a war room. The survey map was the key. It showed my property lines in crisp, undeniable black and white, with measurements down to the inch. The shed wasn't just a little over the line. It was a full 6 feet onto my land, a clear violation of every rule in the book. Karen could talk about community property all she wanted, but the law was on my side, and I was going to make sure she felt the full weight of it. But law alone wasn't enough. I'd dealt with Karen before, her passive-aggressive notes about my lawn height, her friendly reminders about mailbox colors, her endless crusade to make our neighborhood look like a Stepford Wives set. She was the kind of person who thrived on control, who'd twist any situation to make herself the victim or the hero. If I came at her with just a lawyer and a stack of papers, she'd find a way to weasel out, to rally her HOA cronies and turn this into a PR battle. No, I needed something bigger, something that would hit her where it hurt: her pride, her wallet, her precious reputation. That's when I started thinking about the shed itself. It was a nice shed, really. Solid construction, good materials, probably worth a decent chunk of change. And it was sitting on my land, free of charge, thanks to Karen's overreach. What if I didn't fight to tear it down? What if I kept it, used it, turned it into something that would make her squirm every time she saw it? The idea was so deliciously petty, I almost laughed out loud. I could rent it out, maybe turn it into a storage unit or a workshop, and let Karen watch as her own mistake generated cash for me. It was the kind of revenge that didn't just sting, it lingered. I grabbed my laptop and started typing up notes, my fingers flying across the keys. I'd need to check local zoning laws, make sure I could legally rent out a structure like that. I'd need to draft a rental agreement, maybe get some insurance to cover my bases. And I'd need to make the listing irresistible, something that would draw attention and make it impossible for Karen to ignore. I could already picture her face, that tight little smile crumbling as she realized her shed was now my side hustle. The more I thought about it, the more excited I got. This wasn't just about winning a fight, it was about rewriting the rules of the game. Karen thought she could push me around because she had the HOA behind her, but she'd underestimated me. I wasn't some pushover who'd roll over at the first sign of trouble. I was a guy with a deed, a plan, and a grudge that was starting to feel like a superpower. By the time I finished my coffee, I was practically buzzing with energy. The shed was still there, still ugly, still a violation of everything I held dear. But now it was something else, too, a trophy, a challenge, a middle finger right back at Karen. I stepped outside again, this time with my phone in hand, and started filming a quick video of the construction. I narrated as I went, keeping my voice calm but firm, documenting every detail for posterity. "This is my backyard," I said, panning across the grass. "These are my property markers. And this is a shed being built 6 feet onto my land without my permission." I zoomed in on the workers, on the lumber, on the sheer audacity of it all. I didn't know if I'd need the footage for a lawyer or a viral post, but I wanted it on record. This was my line in the sand. As I filmed, I caught Karen's eye again. She was still standing there, still smirking, but now there was a flicker of something else in her expression. Uncertainty, maybe, or the first hint of worry. Good. Let her wonder what I was up to. Let her think she'd won this round. She had no idea what was coming. I finished the video, saved it to my cloud, and headed back inside. The workers kept hammering, the shed kept growing, and the morning kept slipping away. But I wasn't the same guy who'd woken up an hour ago, dreaming of coffee and quiet. I was Mason, homeowner, strategist, and soon-to-be thorn in Karen's side. I spent the rest of the morning researching, planning, and letting my anger sharpen into something useful. I called a buddy who worked in real estate, asked him about renting out accessory structures, and got some quick advice on how to stay above board. I checked the city's zoning website, confirming that I could use the shed for storage or even a small business as long as I followed a few basic rules. Every piece of information I found was another bullet in my arsenal, another reason to believe I could turn this disaster into a triumph. By noon, the construction crew was packing up for lunch, their tools falling silent for the first time all morning. The shed stood there, half-finished, but already imposing, a wooden monument to Karen's hubris. I walked out to the yard one last time, standing just inside my fence, and stared at it. It wasn't just a shed anymore. It was a battlefield, a chessboard, a chance to show Karen that she'd picked the wrong guy to mess with. I could feel the weight of the moment, the way everything was about to shift. This wasn't just about my backyard. It was about every time Karen had bullied a neighbor, every time she'd wielded her HOA power like a club. It was about justice, petty and perfect. I turned back to the house, my slippers leaving faint prints in the grass, and made a silent promise to myself. Karen thought today was her victory lap. She thought she'd outsmarted me, outmaneuvered me, claimed a piece of my land for her stupid little empire. But she was wrong. Today wasn't her win. It was the start of her downfall. And I was going to make sure it was a slow, satisfying, and gloriously ironic one. The shed was mine now, and so was the game. Checkmate was coming, and I was going to enjoy every move. The sun was climbing higher in the sky by the time the construction crew took their lunch break, leaving the half-built shed standing like an uninvited guest in my backyard. I stood at the kitchen window, staring at it, my coffee long gone cold. The rage from earlier was still there, a low burn in my chest, but it was starting to morph into something else, something sharper, more focused. Karen had made her move, planting that shed 6 feet onto my property like she owned the place, and now it was my turn. I wasn't going to tear it down or call a lawyer just yet. No, that was too easy, too predictable. Karen thought she could bully me into submission with her HOA rulebook and her smug little smile, but she'd miscalculated. That shed wasn't just a violation of my property line. It was an opportunity, a gift wrapped in arrogance and plywood. I was going to turn her mistake into my masterpiece, and I was going to make sure she regretted every nail driven into my land. I headed to my office, a small room off the living room cluttered with books, old tax files, and a desk that hadn't been organized since I moved in 5 years ago. If I was going to outsmart Karen, I needed to be airtight, and that meant digging into the paperwork. I pulled out every document I could find related to my property. The deed, the survey map, the HOA agreement, even the closing papers from when I bought the house. I spread them out on the kitchen table, turning my quiet Saturday into a full-on strategy session. The survey map was the star of the show, a crisp diagram with my property lines marked in bold, black ink. I traced my finger along the boundary, confirming what I already knew. The shed was a full 6 feet over the line, sitting squarely on my land. The property markers, those little metal stakes I'd paid a surveyor $500 to install, were still visible in the grass, glinting in the sunlight like tiny middle fingers to Karen's audacity. I leaned back in my chair, letting the reality sink in. Legally, I was golden. The deed was clear, the survey was undeniable, and Karen had no claim to this chunk of my backyard. She could spout her community property nonsense all she wanted, but the law wasn't on her side. I could have stopped there, called a lawyer, and had the shed torn down by Monday. But where was the fun in that? Karen didn't just need to lose. She needed to feel it. She needed to watch her power crumble, to choke on the consequences of her own hubris. And I had a feeling the shed itself was the key to making that happen. I grabbed my laptop and started typing up notes, my mind racing with possibilities. The shed was sturdy, well-built, probably worth a few grand in materials alone. Karen hadn't skimped. She'd hired a professional crew, used high-quality lumber, and even thrown in a concrete foundation. It was almost a shame to think about destroying it. Almost. But what if I didn't destroy it? What if I kept it, used it, turned it into something that would make Karen's blood boil every time she saw it? The idea hit me like a lightning bolt. I could rent it out. Turn her illegal shed into a storage unit, a workshop, maybe even a quirky little office space. I could make money off her mistake, let her watch as her own overreach funded my bank account. It was petty, it was brilliant, and it was exactly the kind of revenge that would keep me grinning for months. I opened a new tab and started researching local zoning laws, my fingers flying across the keyboard. The city's website was a maze of bureaucratic jargon, but after an hour of digging, I found what I needed. As long as the shed was on my private property and met basic safety codes, I could use it for storage or even a small business without needing a special permit. There were a few hoops to jump through: fire safety, electrical if I added any, but nothing insurmountable. I jotted down the key points, feeling a surge of excitement. This was real. This was doable. Karen had handed me a fully functional structure, free of charge, and I was going to milk it for everything it was worth. Next, I called my buddy Jake, a real estate agent who'd helped me buy the house. Jake was the kind of guy who could talk his way out of a bear trap, and he knew the ins and outs of property law better than most lawyers. I caught him just as he was heading out to show a condo downtown. "Mason, what's up?" he said, his voice crackling through the phone. "You selling that place already?" "Nah," I said, leaning against the kitchen counter. "Got a weird situation. The HOA built a shed on my land without asking. 6 feet over the property line. I'm thinking about renting it out to screw with them. Can I do that?" Jake laughed, a loud, barking sound that made me pull the phone away from my ear. "You're kidding. They just build it? No permission?" "Nope. Karen from the HOA's behind it. Claims it's for community storage." "Oh man, that's gold," he said, still chuckling. "Okay, yeah, you can probably rent it out, but you gotta cover your bases. Make sure it's up to code, get a basic rental agreement, and maybe check with the city to confirm you don't need a variance. If it's on your land, though, you've got the upper hand. Just don't advertise it as a living space. Zoning will nail you for that." "Got it," I said, scribbling notes. "Anything else?" "Yeah, get insurance. Liability, in case someone trips over a rake or whatever. And take pictures. Lots of pictures. If this goes south, you want proof it was their screw-up, not yours." "Thanks, man," I said. "I owe you a beer." "Make it 2, he said, and hung up. Jake's advice was exactly what I needed to solidify the plan. I spent the next hour downloading a generic rental agreement template and tweaking it to fit the shed. I kept it simple: monthly rent, security deposit, no modifications without my approval, and a clause about terminating the lease if the shed had to be removed for legal reasons. I wasn't a lawyer, but I'd watched enough true crime documentaries to know you had to cover your ass. By the time I finished, the document looked professional enough to pass muster, and I felt a little thrill of satisfaction. This was happening. I was really going to do this. Now came the fun part: crafting the rental listing. I grabbed my phone and headed outside, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the yard. The shed was even more impressive up close, its walls now fully framed, the roof starting to take shape. It wasn't pretty. Bare wood and exposed nails don't exactly scream curb appeal, but it was solid, functional, and, with the right spin, marketable. I started snapping photos, experimenting with angles to make it look bigger, more inviting. I crouched low to get a dramatic shot against the sky, zoomed in on the sturdy doorframe, and even took a few artsy shots with the maple trees in the background. By the time I was done, I had a dozen decent photos, enough to make the shed look like the hottest storage space in town. Back inside, I opened a browser tab and pulled up a local rental site, one of those free platforms where people list everything from apartments to parking spots. I started typing the listing, letting my inner salesman take over. Brand new storage shed in prime suburban location, I wrote. Secure, spacious, and perfect for tools, equipment, or seasonal gear. Convenient access to local parks and community amenities. Available immediately. I didn't lie, but I stretched the truth so thin it practically squeaked. Prime location was technically true. It was in my backyard, after all, and community amenities could mean anything from the park down the street to the mailbox Karen was so obsessed with. I set the rent at $150 a month, low enough to attract interest, but high enough to make Karen's head explode when she found out. I uploaded the photos, hit post, and leaned back in my chair, a grin spreading across my face. The trap was set. Now I just had to wait for the bait to work. I didn't have to wait long. By dinner time, my phone was buzzing with notifications. The listing had already gotten 20 views, and I had 3 inquiries from people asking about dimensions, access, and availability. One guy wanted to store his motorcycle, another needed space for landscaping equipment, and a third was vague but enthusiastic, saying it was perfect for my hobby. I responded to each one, keeping my tone friendly but professional, and scheduled a showing for the next morning with the motorcycle guy, a retired veteran named Mr. Sullivan. He sounded polite on the phone, a little gruff but genuine, and I had a feeling he'd be a good first tenant. Plus, the idea of a no-nonsense vet storing his Harley in Karen's shed was just too poetic to pass up. That night, I barely slept. My brain was buzzing with possibilities, scenarios, and a healthy dose of vindictive glee. I kept imagining Karen's face when she found out, her tight little smile collapsing into a scowl, her voice rising to that shrill pitch she used when she was losing control. I pictured her storming over, demanding to know what I was doing, only to be handed a copy of my deed and a rental contract. The thought was so satisfying I almost got out of bed to toast myself with a beer. But I stayed put, staring at the ceiling, letting the plan solidify in my mind. This wasn't just about the shed anymore. It was about showing Karen that she couldn't push people around without consequences. It was about taking her power and turning it into mine. The next morning, I was up before the sun, fueled by adrenaline and a fresh pot of coffee. I headed outside to check on the shed, half expecting Karen to have sabotaged it overnight. But it was still there, untouched, its bare walls glowing faintly in the dawn light. The construction crew hadn't returned yet, so I took the opportunity to measure the interior, 10 by 12 feet, plenty of room for storage, and check for any obvious safety issues. Everything looked solid, no loose nails or wobbly beams. Karen's crew had done their job well, which only made my plan sweeter. They'd built me a rental property, and I hadn't paid a dime. Mr. Sullivan arrived at 9 sharp, pulling up in a beat-up Ford pickup that looked like it had seen a few wars. He was a stocky guy in his 60s, with a gray buzz cut and a handshake that could crush walnuts. "Nice setup," he said, nodding at the shed as we walked across the yard. "Need a place for my fishing gear and some tools. Garage is full, and the wife's tired of tripping over my stuff." I grinned, liking him already. "It's brand new," I said, opening the door to show him the interior. "Built by the HOA, believe it or not. Little mix-up with the property line, but it's all legal on my end." He raised an eyebrow, clearly sensing there was a story, but didn't press. "Long as it's dry and secure, I'm good," he said, stepping inside. He looked around, tapped the walls, and nodded approvingly. "I'll take it. What's the deal?" I quoted him $150 a month, with a $200 security deposit, and offered a discount if he signed that day. He didn't even haggle, just pulled out his wallet, counted out the cash, and signed the agreement I'd printed out. We shook hands, and just like that, Karen's shed was officially a business. I handed him a key to the padlock I'd installed that morning and told him he could move in whenever he wanted. He thanked me, climbed back into his truck, and drove off, leaving me standing in the yard with a fistful of cash and a grin that wouldn't quit. I was still riding that high when I saw Karen. She was across the street, pretending to check her mailbox, but her eyes were locked on me. She'd seen the whole thing, Mr. Sullivan, the handshake, the contract. Her face was a mask of barely contained fury, her lips pressed into a thin line. I gave her a cheerful wave, the kind you give a neighbor you actually liked, and watched her practically vibrate with rage. She didn't come over, didn't say a word, just turned on her heel and marched back to her house. I knew she was plotting something, but I didn't care. The shed was mine, the tenant was locked in, and the game was officially on. I spent the rest of the day fine-tuning the plan. I called my insurance agent to add a liability policy for the shed, just in case Mr. Sullivan's fishing rods caused an international incident. I printed out copies of the deed and survey map, tucking them into a folder for easy access. And I kept an eye on the rental site, responding to new inquiries and scheduling another showing for the following day, just in case Mr. Sullivan backed out. The interest was overwhelming. Apparently, affordable storage was a hot commodity in our little suburb. By evening, I had a waiting list of 5 people, all eager to rent a shed that didn't even exist a week ago. As the sun set, I sat on my porch with a beer, staring out at the shed. It was still ugly, still half-finished, but now it was something else, too, a symbol of Karen's mistake, a monument to my revenge. I could almost hear her fuming in her house, probably drafting some nasty HOA letter or calling her lawyer. Let her try. I had the law, the paperwork, and the moral high ground. More importantly, I had a plan that was already paying dividends, literally and figuratively. Karen thought she'd won by building that shed. She had no idea she'd just handed me the keys to her downfall. And I was going to make sure she felt every second of it. The morning after I signed the rental agreement with Mr. Sullivan, I woke up with a fire in my gut. The shed stood proudly in my backyard, a silent testament to Karen's arrogance, and now it was generating cash $150 a month, to be exact, while she stewed in her pastel-colored kingdom across the street. I could have stopped there, basked in the petty glory of turning her mistake into my side hustle, but that wasn't enough. Karen hadn't just crossed a property line. She'd declared war on my autonomy, my rights, and every homeowner who'd ever flinched under her HOA tyranny. This wasn't just about a shed anymore. It was about dismantling her power, brick by smug brick, and I was ready to play dirty, legally, of course. The deed was in my hand, the law was on my side, and I was about to make Karen regret the day she ever thought she could outsmart me. I brewed a pot of coffee, stronger than usual, and sat at the kitchen table, my war room from the day before still littered with documents. The survey map, the deed, the rental contract, they were my arsenal, but I needed more than just paperwork to take Karen down. She was slippery, the kind of person who'd twist a speeding ticket into a sob story about community safety. If I was going to beat her, I had to be relentless, strategic, and one step ahead. I sipped my coffee, staring out at the shed, its half-finished walls glowing in the morning light. Mr. Sullivan had already dropped off a few fishing rods, and the sight of his gear neatly stacked inside made me grin. Every box he moved in was another nail in Karen's coffin, and I was just getting started. My first move was to double-check my legal standing. I'd already confirmed the shed was on my land, but Karen was the type to throw curveballs, fake violations, forged documents, anything to keep her grip on the neighborhood. I opened my laptop and dove back into the city's zoning website, cross-referencing every regulation I could find. The shed was well within code, under 200 square feet, no permanent plumbing or electrical, and built on private property. I even found a section on encroachment disputes, which basically said that if someone builds on your land without permission, you can claim the structure or demand its removal. Claiming it was exactly what I'd done, and renting it out was just the cherry on top. I printed out the relevant pages, highlighting key sentences in neon yellow, and added them to my growing folder of ammunition. Next, I called the city's zoning office to get an official record of my property lines. The woman on the phone, a cheerful clerk named Linda, was happy to pull up my file. "Yup, your survey's on record," she said, her voice crackling through the speaker. "Everything matches what you're describing. If someone built over your line, that's a clear violation. You want to file a complaint?" "Not yet," I said, leaning back in my chair. "Just want to make sure I've got my ducks in a row. Can you send me a copy of the survey and any HOA filings for my address?" "Sure thing," she said. "I'll email them over. And if you do file, just give me a heads up. We've had a few run-ins with that HOA of yours." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh, yeah? Like what?" Linda laughed, a knowing chuckle. "Let's just say your president likes to play fast and loose with permits. Nothing sticks, though. She's good at covering her tracks." "Not this time," I muttered, more to myself than to her. I thanked Linda, hung up, and checked my email. The documents were already there, clean and official, with the city's seal stamped on every page. I saved them to my cloud drive, printed duplicates, and tucked them into my folder. Karen might be good at dodging accountability, but she wasn't going to dodge me. That afternoon, I decided to poke the bear. I knew Karen had seen Mr. Sullivan move in, and I wanted to see how she'd react now that her shed was officially my cash cow. I grabbed my phone, walked out to the yard, and started taking more photos, close-ups of the shed, the property markers, even a cheeky shot of Mr. Sullivan's fishing rods stacked inside. I posted them to the neighborhood's online forum, a place where Karen usually held court with her endless posts about mailbox colors and lawn maintenance. My post was short and sweet, excited to announce my new storage rental. "Thanks to the HOA for the free construction. DM for inquiries." I hit send, leaned against the fence, and waited for the fireworks. They didn't take long. Within an hour, my phone buzzed with a notification. Karen had commented on the post, her words dripping with that condescending tone she'd perfected over years of HOA dominance. "Mason, this is highly inappropriate," she wrote. "The shed is community property, and your actions are in violation of HOA regulations. Please cease this immediately or face fines." She'd even attached a screenshot of some vague HOA rule about unauthorized structures, as if that applied to a shed she'd built on my land. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my phone. Karen genuinely thought she could bully me with a rulebook she didn't even understand. I didn't respond online, too public, too easy for her to spin. Instead, I printed out her comment, added it to my folder, and started drafting a private message. "Karen," I wrote, keeping my tone polite but razor sharp, "the shed is on my property, as confirmed by my deed and survey. I'm well within my rights to rent it out. If you have concerns, feel free to contact my lawyer. In the meantime, thanks for the free shed." I attached a photo of the survey map, highlighting the property line, and hit send. Let her choke on that. By evening, the neighborhood forum was buzzing. My post had racked up dozens of likes, and a few neighbors had even chimed in with clapping emojis and comments like, "Well played," and "About time someone stood up to her." Karen's comment, meanwhile, was getting ratioed into oblivion, with people pointing out the obvious. If the shed was on my land, it was mine. I could almost picture her sitting in her living room, clutching her pearls, her face turning that shade of red that only comes from pure, unfiltered rage. Good. Let her stew. Let her realize she'd picked a fight with the wrong guy. But Karen wasn't one to go down quietly. The next morning, I found a letter taped to my front door, printed on official HOA letterhead, and signed with her looping, self-important signature. It was a formal notice, claiming I was in violation of HOA rules for operating a commercial enterprise and erecting an unauthorized structure. It demanded I cease renting the shed and pay a $500 fine within 48 hours or face further action. I read it twice, my jaw tightening with each word. The sheer gall of it, calling me the violator when she'd built the damn thing, was almost admirable. Almost. I didn't rip the letter up, though I wanted to. Instead, I added it to my folder, took a photo, and called Jake again. "She's trying to find me," I said, pacing the kitchen. "Says I'm running an illegal business. Can she do that?" Jake snorted. "Not if the shed's on your land. HOA can't regulate private property like that. They can whine about aesthetics, maybe, but fines for renting? That's a stretch. Send her a cease and desist letter. Make it clear you'll sue if she keeps harassing you." "Sue?" I said, pausing. "That's a big step." "Not really," he said. "You don't have to follow through. Just scare her. She's banking on you backing down. Show her you won't." I hung up, inspired. I didn't have a lawyer on speed dial, but I knew how to Google. I found a cease and desist template online, tweaked it to fit the situation, and printed it out on my fanciest letterhead, which was just some resume paper I'd bought for a job interview years ago. The letter was a thing of beauty, polite, professional, and dripping with veiled threats. "Dear Mrs. Karen," it began, "I am in receipt of your baseless notice dated yesterday. The shed in question is on my private property as confirmed by attached survey and deed. Your unauthorized construction constitutes encroachment, and I have chosen to repurpose the structure rather than pursue its removal. Any further attempts to fine or harass me will be met with legal action, including but not limited to claims for trespass and damages." I signed it with a flourish, attached copies of every document in my arsenal, and dropped it off at the HOA office that afternoon. The office was a small room in the community center, staffed by a bored retiree who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. I handed her the envelope, marked urgent, for Karen, and gave her my best neighborly smile. "Make sure she gets this," I said. She nodded, barely looking up from her crossword puzzle. As I walked out, I caught a glimpse of Karen through the window, shuffling papers at a desk in the back. She didn't see me, but I saw her, and the thought of her opening that letter made my day. I didn't have to wait long for her response. That evening, I was grilling burgers in the backyard when Karen came storming across the street, her face a blotchy shade of purple. She stopped at the fence, hands on her hips, and launched into a tirade. "Mason, this is unacceptable," she shrieked, waving my letter like it was a weapon. "You can't threaten me. The HOA has every right to regulate this neighborhood, and that shed is community property." I flipped a burger, keeping my voice calm. "Karen, the shed's on my land. I've got the deed, the survey, and the law on my side. You built it, sure, but you built it for me. And now it's paying my bills." Her eyes bulged, and for a second, I thought she might actually climb the fence. "You're turning this neighborhood into a slum," she spat. "Renting out sheds to strangers? What's next, a trailer park?" I laughed, which only made her madder. "Call it what you want," I said, "but it's legal, and it's mine. You want to fight me on it? Go ahead. I've got a lawyer on speed dial." That was a bluff, but it landed. Karen sputtered, her words tripping over each other, then turned and stomped back to her house, muttering about unneighborly behavior. I finished grilling, ate my burger, and savored the victory. But I knew Karen wasn't done. She was too stubborn, too obsessed with control, to let this go. Sure enough, 2 days later, I came home from work to find a bright orange notice stuck to the shed, declaring it non-compliant and ordering its immediate removal. It was signed by Karen, of course, with a fake-looking HOA stamp that screamed, "I printed this at Kinko's." I didn't even get mad. I just snapped a photo, called the city's zoning office, and asked for an inspector to come out. The inspector, a guy named Dave with a mustache that belonged in a 70s cop show, showed up within an hour. He was friendly, professional, and clearly amused by the situation. "So, let me get this straight," he said, walking around the shed. "Your HOA built this on your land without asking, and now they're saying you have to tear it down?" "Yep," I said, handing him my folder. Here's the deed, the survey, and their latest notice. Oh, and a rental contract, since I'm using it as a storage unit. Dave flipped through the documents, chuckling. This is a new one, he said. Well, you're in the clear. The shed's on your property, meets code, and you're not breaking any laws. Their notice is about as enforceable as a post-it note. He scribbled something on his clipboard, then added, you might want to keep an eye on that HOA president. She's got a history of pulling stunts like this. Trust me, I said, I'm watching. Dave left, promising to send me an official letter confirming the shed's legality. I taped a copy of his business card to the shed, just to rub it in Karen's face. Sure enough, she was lurking across the street, pretending to water her roses, but clearly watching the whole thing. When Dave drove off, she marched over, her face a storm cloud. You're making a mockery of this neighborhood, she yelled, pointing at the shed. This is why we have standards. I crossed my arms, leaning against the fence. Karen, the only mockery here is you thinking you can build on my land and then fine me for it. Talk to the city. They just cleared me. She opened her mouth, closed it, then opened it again, like a fish gasping for air. Finally, she hissed, "This isn't over," and stormed off. I watched her go, feeling like a boxer who'd just landed a clean jab. But the real knockout was coming, and it wasn't from me. That night, I got a text from Brian, a quiet HOA board member who'd always seemed uncomfortable with Karen's reign. Check your mailbox, it said. Curious, I walked outside and found a USB drive tucked inside. No note, no explanation. I plugged it into my laptop and my jaw dropped. It was a goldmine. Dozens of emails between Karen and her HOA cronies, laying out plans to seize private land for community projects without notifying residents or filing permits. One email, dated a week before the shed went up, was particularly damning. Mason's lot is empty anyway, Karen wrote. Just build it and deal with complaints later. He'll roll over. Another email bragged about streamlining HOA funds for unapproved projects, with phrases like they'll never know and keep it off the books. I sat back, stunned. This wasn't just arrogance. It was corruption, plain and simple. Karen wasn't just a control freak, she was a crook, using her position to strong-arm neighbors and line her own pockets. The USB drive was my Excalibur, and I was going to wield it with precision. I spent the next hour backing up every email, organizing them by date and topic, and drafting a complaint to the city zoning office. I attached screenshots of the worst emails, along with copies of Karen's fake notices and my property documents. For good measure, I CC'd the state HOA regulatory board, knowing they'd eat this up. I didn't announce what I was doing, no need to tip my hand. I just hit send, leaned back, and let the wheels of justice start turning. The next few days were a masterclass in watching Karen unravel. She doubled down, slapping more notices on the shed and sending me threatening emails about legal consequences. I ignored them, letting her dig her own grave. Meanwhile, the city was moving fast. Inspectors started showing up around the neighborhood, poking at other HOA projects, a gazebo in the park, storage units on public land. Even a half-built pergola Karen had greenlit without a permit. One by one, violation notices went up, bright orange and impossible to ignore. The HOA's reputation was crumbling, and Karen was at the center of the storm. The climax came at an emergency HOA meeting she called to address recent disruptions. I showed up, folder in hand, and sat in the back, watching her try to spin the narrative. She ranted about rogue homeowners and outside threats, painting me as the villain. But the room wasn't buying it. Neighbors were furious, not at me, but at her, thanks to the leaked emails I'd quietly shared with a few key residents. When Karen pointed at me, accusing me of undermining community standards, I stood up, handed out copies of the emails to everyone, and sat back down. The silence was deafening. Page after page revealed her schemes, her lies, her abuse of power. An older resident, Mr. Hawthorne, stood up, shaking with rage, and demanded a vote of no confidence. The motion passed in minutes, and Karen was ousted as president, her gavel slamming down like a guillotine. I walked out of that meeting feeling like a general who'd just won a war without firing a shot. Karen was done, humiliated, powerless, and facing a mountain of fines from the city. The shed was still mine, still rented, still a daily reminder of her failure. But the fight wasn't over. I knew she'd come for me one last time, desperate to salvage her pride. And when she did, I'd be ready, with documents, evidence, and a grin that said, "You built this, Karen. Now watch it bury you." The dust had barely settled from the HOA meeting where Karen's reign as president was unceremoniously ended, but the neighborhood already felt lighter, like a storm cloud had finally drifted away. I sat on my porch that evening, a glass of iced tea in hand, watching the shed glow faintly under the fairy lights I'd strung up around it. Mr. Sullivan's fishing rods were neatly stacked inside, a quiet reminder that Karen's illegal construction was now my profitable little empire. She'd built it to flex her power, to claim a piece of my land as her own, but instead, she'd handed me a victory so sweet I could taste it in every sip of my drink. Karen was down, but not out, not yet. I knew she'd come for one last swing, desperate to claw back some shred of her dignity. But I was ready, armed with documents, evidence, and a plan that had already turned her arrogance into my monthly paycheck. This was the endgame, and I was going to make sure it was checkmate. The city's response to my complaint was swift and brutal. Inspectors swarmed the neighborhood, their clipboards and neon orange notices popping up like weeds after a rain. Karen's pet projects, a half-finished gazebo in the community park, storage units plopped on public easements, even a tacky fountain she'd installed without a permit, were all slapped with violations. The HOA's budget, already strained from Karen's creative accounting, buckled under the weight of fines and legal fees. Neighbors who'd once cowered under her rule now whispered openly about her downfall, their voices a mix of disbelief and glee. I watched it all unfold from my porch, sipping lemonade and feeling like a chess grandmaster who'd just executed a perfect gambit. Karen had thought she was untouchable, but the city wasn't her HOA board. They didn't care about her live, laugh, love t-shirts or her ability to cry on command. They cared about permits, laws, and cold, hard evidence I'd happily provided. Karen's personal unraveling was even more spectacular. The fines didn't just hit the HOA, they hit her directly. The city held her personally liable for the unauthorized constructions she'd spearheaded, and the penalties stacked up faster than she could dodge them. Thousands of dollars in fines, plus legal costs, turned her suburban palace into a financial sinkhole. Word spread that she'd put her prized SUV up for sale, its shiny chrome wheels a relic of her former glory. A neighbor told me she'd even cashed out part of her retirement account, a desperate move that screamed defeat. I heard rumors she'd tried renting out a room in her house, but nobody wanted to live with the neighborhood's most hated woman. The irony was delicious. While Karen scrambled to pay her bills, her shed, was pulling in $150 a month, steady as a heartbeat, with a waiting list of tenants ready to take Mr. Sullivan's place if he ever moved out. I didn't let the victory go to my head. Karen was wounded, but she was still dangerous, like a cornered animal with nothing to lose. I kept my folder of documents, deed, survey, emails, city letters within arm's reach, ready for whatever she threw next. And throw she did. A week after her ousting, she showed up at my door, her face a forced mask of civility that didn't quite hide the rage in her eyes. She was clutching a checkbook, her knuckles white, and her voice was so saccharine it could have rotted teeth. "Mason," she said, "I'd like to buy the shed back. Name your price." I leaned against the doorframe, savoring the moment. This was the same woman who'd called me unneighborly, who'd tried to find me for her own mistake, who'd built a shed on my land without so much as a text. Now here she was, begging for a lifeline. I pretended to think it over, rubbing my chin like I was weighing a monumental decision. Gee, Karen, I said, I appreciate the offer, but the shed's got sentimental value now. Plus, it's making me money. I think I'll keep it. Her face twitched, a crack in her facade. I'll pay double its value, she said, her voice tightening. Triple, even. Just name a number. I shook my head, my smile widening. No deal. This shed's a keeper. I'm even thinking about adding solar panels, maybe turning it into an eco-friendly rental. Thanks for building it, though. Really saved me some cash. She stared at me, her eyes narrowing into slits, and for a second, I thought she might scream. Instead, she turned and walked away, her heels clicking against the pavement like gunfire. I closed the door, laughing so hard I had to brace myself against the wall. Karen offering to buy back her own mistake was the kind of poetic justice you couldn't script. But I wasn't done twisting the knife. A few days later, she came back with a new tactic, humility, or at least her version of it. She knocked on my door, her posture slumped, her eyes avoiding mine. Mason, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, I need to rent the shed. For storage. I'm in a bind. I raised an eyebrow, barely containing my glee. Karen, renting her own shed? It was too perfect. I pretended to consider it, pacing the porch for effect. Well, I said, it's in high demand, but I suppose I could make room. 3 months rent up front, plus a $500 security deposit. Standard contract, no exceptions. Her jaw tightened, but she nodded. I printed out the agreement, added the terms in bold, and handed it to her with a pen. She signed it, her hand shaking, her signature a jagged scrawl. I took the check, counted the cash she'd scraped together for the deposit, and gave her a copy of the contract. Welcome to the tenant club, I said, my voice dripping with mock cheer. She didn't respond, just grabbed her copy and left, her shoulders hunched like she was carrying the weight of her own defeat. From that day on, Karen had to make the walk of shame to my porch every month, check in hand, to pay her rent. I made sure the transactions were public, inviting neighbors over for coffee or a beer on rent day. They'd sit on the porch, chuckling as Karen approached, her head down, her face a mask of humiliation. Nobody said anything cruel, no one needed to. The sight of her, once the neighborhood's self-appointed queen, reduced to a tenant in a shed she'd built, was louder than any insult. I used the extra income to pay down my mortgage, socking away a little extra in a savings account I jokingly called Karen's Shed Scholarship. Every time I checked the balance, I smiled, knowing her arrogance was funding my future. The neighborhood, meanwhile, was transforming. Without Karen's iron fist, the HOA found its footing under new leadership. A quiet guy named Tom who believed in transparency and actual community input. Block parties became a regular thing, with kids running through the streets and neighbors grilling burgers like we were in a Norman Rockwell painting. The park got a volunteer cleanup day, and families who'd once kept their blinds shut started opening their doors. The shed, still standing proudly at the edge of my yard, became a local legend. People brought friends by to see it, pointing and laughing as they recounted Karen's downfall. I even planted a small garden around it, sunflowers and marigolds, bright and cheerful, framing the shed like a crown. Neighbors complimented the setup, and I'd just nod, letting the flowers do the talking. Karen's personal collapse continued to unfold like a slow-motion car crash. The city reclassified her property due to her violations, flagging her backyard structures, a gazebo, a tool shed, an illegally widened patio, for removal unless she could prove compliance. The cost of permits was astronomical, and demolition wasn't much cheaper. I heard she was drowning in legal fees, her savings gutted, her credit shot. Her house went up for sale, a quiet listing that didn't stay quiet for long. Gossip travels fast in a neighborhood like ours, and potential buyers backed out as soon as they heard about the HOA drama, the fines, and the woman who'd turned a suburb into her personal fiefdom. The for sale sign stayed up for months, a faded monument to her failure. One crisp morning, I was watering my garden when I saw a moving truck idling in front of Karen's house. I put down the hose, my heart skipping a beat. Movers were carrying out boxes, furniture wrapped in plastic, her once pristine decor reduced to cargo. Karen stood on her porch, arms crossed, her face a grim mask. There were no tearful goodbyes, no neighbors waving farewell, just the hollow sound of tape ripping and dollies rolling. I thought about waving, but decided against it. Some endings don't need gestures. They just need to happen. As the truck pulled away, Karen's car trailing behind like a reluctant shadow, I felt a strange mix of triumph and pity. Not enough pity to wish her well, she'd earned every ounce of this, but enough to marvel at how thoroughly she'd orchestrated her own destruction. With Karen gone, the neighborhood blossomed. The air felt lighter, the streets livelier. Kids played basketball in driveways, dogs ran free without Karen's ruler-wielding inspections, and backyard barbecues became a weekend staple. The shed remained a symbol of resilience, its garden blooming brighter with each season. I upgraded it with solar-powered lights and insulated walls, turning it into a gem that drew compliments from passers-by. Mr. Sullivan, still my tenant, loved the space so much he started calling it his man cave, complete with a radio and a folding chair for his fishing breaks. I raised the rent slightly, citing market demand, and he didn't bat an eye. The waiting list grew, with neighbors joking they'd rented just to say they'd stuck it to Karen. At the HOA's annual neighborhood fair, the new board surprised me with a tongue-in-cheek award, a small golden hammer on a wooden vase, engraved with Neighborhood Hero for creative problem solving. The crowd roared with laughter as I accepted it, holding it up like a trophy. It wasn't just for the shed or for outsmarting Karen. It was for what we'd reclaimed, a sense of community, of laughter, of standing up to bullies without sinking to their level. I gave a short speech, keeping it light but pointed. Thanks to Karen for the shed, and thanks to all of you for reminding me what a neighborhood should be. That evening, as the fair's lights twinkled in the distance, I sat on my porch, the hammer award on the table beside me. The shed stood quietly in the yard, its fairy lights swaying in the breeze. Kids rode bikes down the street, their laughter carrying on the wind. A dog barked, a sprinkler hissed, and somewhere, a neighbor clinked a beer bottle in a toast. Life was brighter, kinder, and the shed was its heart, a monument to patience, wit, and the quiet power of doing things right. Karen was gone, her empire reduced to a cautionary tale whispered at barbecues. But her greatest creation remained, not as a symbol of her power, but of her defeat. Every rent check, every sunflower, every neighbor's smile was a reminder that real victory isn't about shouting or fighting dirty. It's about staying calm, playing smart, and letting your enemies build the rope they hang themselves with. I raised my glass to the shed, to karma, and to the sweetest revenge I'd ever tasted, earned without breaking a single rule, and worth every second of the fight.